Rent's up 60%. Time to grow up. Dad said at Thanksgiving dinner, for 3 years, I worked 80-hour weeks, and they still treated me like I was playing house. My name is Addison Ray. I'm 31 years old, and until recently, I thought effort could rewrite family history. I live in a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Seattle, above a florist shop that opens too early and plays too much soft jazz through the floorboards. The space smells like eucalyptus and black coffee, which suits me fine. I've learned to work with distractions. I used to be the chief operating officer of ModSync, a logistics startup I co-founded with my closest friend, Jules, for 5 years. We grew the company from my kitchen counter to a downtown office with glass walls, 12 staffers, and a multi-million-dollar seed round. We built smart systems that helped small retailers optimize their deliveries. Clean, modular, intuitive. Clients loved it. Investors believed in it. And then one day, they didn't. When the expansion slowed down in late 2021, Jules and I disagreed about direction. I wanted to consolidate operations. She wanted to chase Series B funding. I wasn't just outvoted, I was outmaneuvered. One morning, I walked into the boardroom and learned that she had brought in a new CEO, a former classmate of hers from Stanford, and quietly removed me from decision-making. It's best for the brand. She said, "You're brilliant at systems, but we need someone who can scale the story." I remember looking at the glossy team photo framed in the hallway and feeling like a ghost in it. By the end of that week, I was gone. No public announcement, no thank you, just my name quietly erased from the leadership tab on our website. I packed my desk into 2 boxes and walked out with the same canvas bag I'd carried on our first client pitch. It felt like betrayal, but I didn't have time to grieve. I returned to Seattle, to the apartment I still hadn't furnished properly, and tried to figure out what came next. My savings were intact, my health was shaky, and my pride was bleeding out slowly. When Thanksgiving rolled around, I hesitated before RSVPing. My father, Elliot, ran Ray House, a local chain of handmade furniture showrooms with a legacy of craftsmanship and outdated thinking. My mother, Veronica, was a tenured lecturer in applied arts who always said I thought like a technician, not a creative. My younger brother, Sasha, was their golden child, tall, charming, chronically underprepared. He had just opened his own lifestyle concept showroom in Portland, funded almost entirely by my parents. They said it was an investment in vision. I had bootstrapped my own company from consulting jobs and ramen noodles. They never asked how. That Thanksgiving dinner was held in the dining room I grew up in, where everything felt slightly smaller than I remembered, except for the weight of silence between sentences. The turkey was dry, the wine was sweet, and Sasha arrived late with a new watch and zero apology. I tried to make conversation about new tools in last-mile fulfillment, but no one asked questions. When I mentioned casually that I was between ventures, my father put down his fork, fixed me with that sharp, quiet stare of his, and said it. Rent's up 60%. Time to grow up. The room fell into a hush, broken only by the clink of Sasha pouring himself more wine. "The showroom's doing great," he said, not looking at me. "We're thinking of expanding. Portland's a vibe right now." My mother nodded. "Addison, maybe this is a good time for you to come home. Your dad's been needing help managing inventory. We could use someone with your skills." The insult was dressed like an invitation, but I heard it clearly. Come home, start over, disappear into the family business like a failed experiment. I drove back to my apartment that night with frozen cranberry sauce in the passenger seat and a storm in my chest. I looked around at the half-packed boxes I hadn't touched since leaving ModSync and wondered what exactly I had built, if it could be taken from me so quietly. I wasn't sure if coming home was a retreat or an act of war, but by Monday, I had emailed my father saying I'd take the operations job at Ray House for a few months, just until he hired someone full-time. I told myself, just until I figured out what came next. I didn't know then that a few months would become 3 years, or that everything I touched, everything I fixed, everything I saved would still be credited to someone else. The office at Ray House smelled like cedar and copier toner. My father hadn't changed the layout in over a decade. There were stacks of order forms on a filing cabinet that still bore my grandfather's initials in black marker. The staff worked in respectful silence, but their systems were a mess. Inventory tracking was half digital, half guesswork. The warehouse ran on paper logs and verbal confirmations. No one knew exactly how much walnut slab was in stock or which vendors were actually paid. Still, my father called it operational tradition, like it was something sacred. He introduced me to the team as Addison, his daughter who'd done some startup stuff, and assigned me the title of operations support, not manager, not lead, just support. The first week, I kept my head down. I shadowed the shipping team, reorganized the back office, and manually reconciled months of unfiled invoices. At night, I built a workflow spreadsheet that mapped every step from material arrival to delivery. When I showed it to Elliot, he nodded once and said, "You're good with charts." He didn't ask how many errors it revealed. He didn't comment on the fact that one client had been double billed for a bench order in 3 separate months. I stayed quiet, thinking maybe results would speak louder than explanations. A few weeks later, I fixed a major bottleneck in their return system. I streamlined the vendor payment process and shaved off almost $9,000 in late fees. Customers started noticing the difference. Orders went out faster. Stock stayed consistent. We stopped losing business to newer furniture chains popping up downtown. My father called it a lucky streak. My mother dropped by on a Wednesday afternoon, looked around the showroom, and commented that Sasha's aesthetic influence must be rubbing off on everyone. I had to remind her that Sasha hadn't stepped foot in the warehouse in over a month. Sasha was busy preparing his new showroom launch in Portland. My parents sent him custom signage, pre-finished samples, and even a reclaimed oak centerpiece from the original Ray House store as a symbolic gift. Meanwhile, I had been working 12-hour days in the back of a warehouse with a broken heater and no team when I brought it up once over dinner. Elliot chuckled. That's how real businesses are built, not with cold brew and hashtags. My mother nodded, slicing her steak carefully, as if the conversation bored her. I excused myself early that night. On the way home, I pulled into a gas station and sat in the car for 20 minutes, watching the meter run. Not because I needed gas, but because I couldn't bring myself to go back to an apartment that felt smaller every time I returned. By the 3rd month, I had created an internal dashboard that tied inventory levels to sales velocity. I began meeting with clients personally to understand why they left and what could bring them back. The feedback was consistent. "Your pieces are beautiful," one client said, "but your timelines are a gamble." I adjusted vendor lead times, created templates for custom quotes, and built a shared drive to track supplier reliability. Sasha visited once during that time, walking in with a new shearling coat and a publicist on his phone. He complimented the lighting, said he liked the vibe, then left to go meet an influencer for brunch later that week. My father called a family meeting to announce that Ray House would be investing in expanding Sasha's concept store into an entire lifestyle brand. "We'll put some money behind it," he said. eyes gleaming. He's got the vision, I asked, quietly. If we could at least wait until the main store was stable and debt-free. Elliot waved me off. The main store is fine now, thanks to some temporary adjustments. We're not in crisis anymore. It hit me in the chest like a dull, gloved punch. Temporary adjustments, as if the hundreds of hours, the detailed plans, the negotiations, the nights I stayed past midnight designing a new SKU process, all of it was just duct tape on a leaky pipe. Sasha's dreams were funded, mine were labeled maintenance. That weekend, I skipped dinner. I told them I had a deadline, which was partially true. I had a growing sense of dread that no amount of contribution would ever change the story already written in their heads. The girl who left, the girl who failed, the girl who came home. I wasn't sure yet what was worse, being ignored completely, or being useful and still unseen. And yet, something inside me refused to quit. I wasn't ready to walk away. Spring came late that year, and I barely noticed. I had moved into the cramped room above the warehouse, telling myself it was temporary, just to save commute time. The truth was, I couldn't afford my old apartment anymore. Between groceries, gas, and the unpaid hours I'd been logging, my savings had thinned to a fragile thread. My parents never asked about money, and I never offered, in their eyes. I was living at home again, contributing to the family legacy, which meant I was conveniently invisible and always available. I didn't push back. Not yet. Each day started at 6. I opened the warehouse, ran morning checks, processed overnight orders, and restocked the display floor. By late afternoon, I met with our 3 remaining suppliers and renegotiated payment terms to avoid another cash shortfall. At night, I sat in the back office drafting employee manuals, scheduling shifts, and logging data from our new inventory system, which I built using free tools and borrowed software licenses. When the heater broke again in April, I worked in gloves, typing through numb fingers, pretending I didn't feel cold. I'd done harder things. That's what I told myself. I miss my friend Jules' engagement party. I miss my cousin's graduation. I missed 4 birthdays in a row. I told myself it was the cost of building something real. I still believed, somewhere under the exhaustion, that the work would speak for itself, that once the store was stable, my father would look me in the eye and call me capable. I didn't need praise, just acknowledgement, just for once, to not be spoken to like a backup generator running quietly in the corner. But every meeting I improved, every bottleneck I solved, every win I logged under Ray House's name was met with the same reaction. Elliot would grunt and say, "Well, that's how it should have been from the start." My mother once walked into a vendor meeting I was leading, glanced at the spreadsheets, and asked if I'd seen Sasha's latest newsletter. "His Portland store is doing pop-ups now," she said proudly. "People are saying it's the next West Elm." That month, our largest order of the year nearly fell through. The buyer, a boutique hotel chain, renovating all their suites, wanted a commitment on delivery dates that would have required serious restructuring. I stayed up 2 nights straight, recalibrating fulfillment, and managed to shave 10 days off our production cycle. We closed the deal. My father took the check and told me not to brag. "We've done bigger," he said, though no record supported that. I walked back upstairs and lay on the thin mattress, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't remember the last time I'd spoken to someone who didn't need something from me. I started keeping a private folder labeled Proof, screenshots of customer reviews that praised the improved service, before and after images of our restocked showrooms, monthly revenue charts that showed steady recovery. I wasn't sure why I saved them at first. Maybe it was self-preservation. Maybe I needed a record in case the world gaslit me out of my own effort again. My only escape was a coffee shop on 9th Street that stayed open late. The baristas knew me by name and never asked questions. I'd sit there some evenings with a notebook, scribbling workflows or sketching better layouts for the West Seattle branch. One night, an older woman sat next to me and noticed the floor plan diagram I was reviewing. She asked if I worked in furniture retail. I told her yes, without naming the business. She smiled and said she used to run an independent bookstore until Amazon killed it, and that operational clarity was the only thing that had kept her afloat as long as she lasted. "They'll never thank you," she added, folding her newspaper. "But you'll sleep better knowing you didn't let it fall apart on your watch." I didn't tell her that I barely slept, that every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of missing inventory or broken pallets or email threads that had gone unanswered too long. That sometimes I woke up unsure which day it was, then rushed to the warehouse anyway because someone had to open the door. That I hadn't had a real weekend in 11 months. That I once postponed a dental emergency because Sasha needed headshots edited for a press release. When Ray House won a Heritage Retail mention from a local business association, my name wasn't listed anywhere in the write-up. The photo featured my father standing next to Sasha, both smiling like they'd built it all from scratch. I found the article printed on the break room corkboard, circled in highlighter. Elliot didn't say a word about it. Neither did Veronica. Sasha texted me the next day and said, "Cool, huh? We should do a rooftop party soon. You'd love it." I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard, then set the phone down. I knew the truth. I knew what I had saved. But truth without recognition becomes a quiet weight. It presses down until something has to give. The crack didn't come from a scream or a slammed door. It came from a PDF attachment buried in the finance folder Sasha accidentally shared with me. I had asked him for updated visuals of his Portland showroom to include in our corporate materials. What he sent instead was a folder labeled Equity Packet 2023, meant for an investor deck. Inside were design renders, projected growth slides, and a breakdown of ownership structure. At first I skimmed, uninterested, but then I saw the name Ray House Holding Group listed under silent investors, with a $480,000 infusion recorded as transferred Q3 from legacy parent account. I paused. I knew that account. It was the backup credit line tied directly to the main store, the one I had spent 6 months restructuring to avoid closure. That account had been empty the last time I checked. I opened a second tab, logged into the system quietly, and pulled the financial records. The line item was real. My father had drawn nearly $500,000 from the Ray House Emergency Fund to support Sasha's expansion, without telling me, while I was still sleeping on a fold-out cot above the shipping bay and working weekends to cover vendor delays. I stared at the numbers for 10 minutes without blinking. It wasn't the money that gutted me. It was the pattern. I had sacrificed stability, health, friendships, even the last of my savings to hold this place together. And all the while they were shifting weight from my shoulders to Sasha's future, quietly betting against me, ever knowing. That night, I didn't go back upstairs. I drove aimlessly through Seattle, ending up at a parking lot behind the old stadium. The city lights flickered off the windshield, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I thought about calling someone, maybe Jules, maybe no one. I thought about leaving, just leaving. No note, no plan, just a clean exit, like so many others had taken before me. But somewhere inside the anger, a strange calm started to take shape, not revenge, not bitterness, something colder, quieter, a decision. I returned to work the next morning and said nothing. I processed orders, answered emails, and booked a shipping correction Sasha had forgotten to finalize. When my mother came in later that week to drop off flyers for his upcoming showroom brunch, she handed me a folded invitation like it was a peace offering. "They're naming the Portland space after Grandpa William," she said proudly. "Ray Atelier has a nice ring. Don't you think?" I nodded and placed the card in my drawer without reading it. William had built this business with his hands. I had rebuilt it with mine. And now it would be a ribbon in Sasha's showroom, tied with legacy branding and a catering menu. That weekend, I began backing up every document I had created since returning. I archived the new vendor contracts, the operating manuals, the CRM files, the system templates. I saved them on a separate drive under a plain file name and locked it in the glove compartment of my car. Not because I planned to use them against anyone, but because I needed proof I had been here, that I had done the work, that I hadn't imagined my contribution just because no one had said thank you. The following week, Sasha made headlines in a local design blog, praised for launching a modern reinvention of a Pacific Northwest staple. The article quoted him as saying, "We're trying to bring that small batch craftsmanship into the future, while honoring where we came from." He didn't mention me, not once. My phone buzzed with texts from old colleagues who recognized the Ray House back-end in the photos. One message simply read, "Did you help with this?" I didn't answer. What could I say? By late summer, sales at the main store had stabilized for 5 consecutive quarters. Our supplier ratings were up. Customer complaints were down. The digital catalog I built had expanded to include 200 active SKUs, each with photo tags and delivery times under 4 weeks. I had accomplished in 2 years what my father hadn't in 20, and still, no one said a word. The final trigger came when I walked into the showroom one Friday evening and overheard Elliot telling a longtime customer that Sasha had really taken over operations this year, and that he's been the engine behind all the improvements. I stood behind a rack of bar stools and waited for the conversation to end. Then I walked back to the office, opened a new spreadsheet, and wrote the words "transition plan." That night, I didn't feel anger. I felt a stillness that came from clarity. They would never see me differently because they didn't want to. The story had been written long before I stepped in to fix it. I had only added chapters they refused to read. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't slam doors or leave notes or start drama. I simply stopped explaining myself. That September, I adjusted my schedule without asking. I started arriving at 10 instead of 7, blocking off my early mornings for a new routine. I joined a co-working space in Capitol Hill, rented by the hour, and filled mostly with freelance designers and early-stage founders. I brought my laptop, my old notebook from ModSync, and a quiet kind of hunger I hadn't felt in years. At first, I just reviewed the systems I had built for Ray House. I listed what had worked, what had failed, and what could be turned into a replicable model for other businesses like it. Then, I started mapping out gaps in the small retail landscape places where independent shops were drowning, not because of bad products, but because of bad processes. That was my territory: quiet efficiency, operational infrastructure, the part of business that no one praised, but everyone needed to survive. Every afternoon, I still showed up at Ray House. I processed orders, ran staff huddles, answered customer emails, and held the machine together without drawing attention. I trained one junior team member on the inventory platform, slowly shifting more control to him week by week. His name was Marcus, and he was sharp. He asked questions, took notes, didn't overpromise. One Friday, I let him lead the staff meeting and pretended I had a call. From the corner of the warehouse, I listened to him explain reorder logic with words I had taught him months ago. I didn't correct a thing. That same week, I got a text from Jules. It had been over a year since we last spoke. She wrote, "Congrats on the Ray House turnaround. Saw a write-up in Northwest Builder. Knew you'd make it work." I stared at the message for a long time. I had nothing to prove to her anymore, but something about the tone still made my chest tighten. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the article to myself, saved it in my folder labeled proof, and kept going. By October, I had outlined a full transition plan. I wrote detailed manuals for vendor negotiations, mapped out seasonal trends based on Ray House's last 5 years of sales data, and structured a 6-month operations calendar that Marcus could follow independently. I saved it all on the company drive under a folder named Continuity. I didn't tell anyone what it was, just quietly built the exit before anyone knew I was leaving. I started looking at office listings downtown. Not big, not flashy, just clean light, stable Wi-Fi, and enough space for a desk and a whiteboard. I found one that overlooked a side street near a small tea shop I used to visit before everything fell apart. The lease was short-term. The cost was manageable. I signed it without telling my parents. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The next week, I went out for coffee with Michael. We had crossed paths at a supplier mixer earlier that summer. He ran a sustainable flooring business and had recently transitioned into consulting for independent contractors. That day, we talked for nearly 2 hours, not just about work, but about what happens when your name is tied to a family legacy that doesn't recognize your voice. He understood it too well. His own story involved years of working under a father who refused to let go of control until a near bankruptcy forced him to. Michael said something that stuck with me. Eventually, you stop trying to prove yourself to people who already decided who you are. You start building for the version of you that never needed them. That night, I opened a blank document and wrote the first sentence of my new business plan. Not for Ray House, not for Sasha, not for Legacy, for me. I called it Framework, a consultancy for independent retail businesses needing silent structure, strategy, and operational foundations that don't make headlines but build actual stability. I listed 3 possible pilot clients: an Addison fabric shop, a local kitchenware retailer, and a boutique floral studio, all places that had reached out to Ray House for advice over the past year. I had the experience. I had the tools. I just needed to stop waiting for permission to use them. The next morning, I called the floral studio owner to ask how her order systems were set up. We talked for 45 minutes. By the end of the call, she asked if I offered consulting services. I said I was considering it. She said, "Consider it started. Send me a proposal." I hung up and walked down to the warehouse floor, where Marcus was reviewing the weekly freight sheet. He looked up and smiled. "Looks like the fall stock rotation's on pace." I nodded. "Good. Keep an eye on the returns flag next week. That surge always hits in early November." He made a note without hesitation. I watched him for a second longer than usual, then stepped back quietly. By mid-November, I had packed half my life into the trunk of my car without anyone noticing. A few cookbooks, 2 boxes of files, my backup drive, and a ceramic mug I kept on the corner of my warehouse desk. I signed the final lease documents for my new office and moved in the next morning. It wasn't large, but it had tall windows and enough room to think clearly. I bought a second-hand desk, a simple standing lamp, and a cork board I filled with the kinds of things that didn't need anyone else's approval, my client notes, my systems. And the quote Michael had once said to me scribbled in the corner, "Build for the version of you that never needed them." Back at Ray House, I continued showing up just enough to make my absence gradual. Marcus handled more and more of the daily operations. I guided him without hovering. Sasha was barely around, busy prepping a design holiday capsule for Portland and making noise about a press tour. My parents had shifted all their attention to that showroom, asking Sasha for branding opinions and social media strategies. No one noticed I had stopped managing the vendor calls. No one noticed I had reassigned staff check-ins. No one asked where I had been spending my mornings. It was only when Elliot tried to pull the monthly dashboard and couldn't find the data that he called me into the office. "Where's the new inventory forecast?" he asked, flipping through outdated spreadsheets. I told him Marcus had it. He's been keeping it updated for weeks. Elliot paused, not entirely comfortable with that answer. "You're not checking it anymore," I met his eyes. "I've been focusing on other projects." He didn't ask what they were. He simply frowned, said something vague about standard slipping, and waved me out. The system was still running, but now it was clear who had been holding the weight and who hadn't. Thanksgiving came again. I arrived at the house with a bottle of red wine and a small tray of roasted vegetables. I brought no spreadsheets. I brought no work. I didn't offer to prep the turkey, or fold the napkins, or fix the thermostat. I sat quietly, answered questions politely, and excused myself after dessert. No one protested. The room, as always, was full of Sasha's updates and Veronica's praise. At one point, I watched Elliot laugh so hard at a story Sasha told about missing a plane that he nearly spilled his scotch. I don't remember what the story was. I only remember the quiet realization that I didn't need to be at that table anymore to matter. That weekend, I soft-launched Framework. I emailed 3 business owners I had worked with informally during my Ray House tenure and offered a pro bono consultation. All 3 accepted. By the end of the week, 2 of them referred me to others. I built a basic site, included client testimonials, and started booking out calendar slots into December. It was modest, focused, and real. No investors, no inflated headlines. Just clean, valuable work. The kind I used to believe would one day make my family turn their heads and finally say, "We see you." In early December, Ray House's primary freight partner called me directly. They said the last 2 invoices hadn't been properly coded, and the contact on file wasn't responding. I told them I no longer managed logistics and gave them Marcus's email. They thanked me 20 minutes later. Elliot called, clearly agitated. "We're missing pieces of the fulfillment matrix." He snapped. "Did you move the auto-prioritization logic I didn't explain?" I didn't defend. I simply replied, "That logic only runs if the data is fed properly. I trained Marcus. If it's not running, it's not a system issue." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not coming back." "Are you?" I didn't answer right away. Then, calmly, I said, "Not in the way you're used to." The silence on the other end wasn't anger. It was something else. Maybe the start of awareness. Maybe not. I didn't need it to be anything anymore. Later that week, I dropped off my final binder of Ray House documentation at the office, sealed and labeled by department. Marcus met me at the door. "You're really out," he said. I nodded. "You'll be fine. Just trust the data, not the noise." He smiled and shook my hand. "You taught me more than anyone ever did here." I drove away without looking back. That night, I walked into my new office, turned on the desk lamp, and made tea while emails from new clients rolled in. The numbers weren't explosive, but they were steady. My schedule filled by word of mouth, no press, no spotlight, just results, just trust, just me. By mid-December, the calls started coming more frequently, not from new clients, but from Ray House employees. Marcus called first, asking if I could walk him through the quarterly restocking template again. I offered to resend the file and told him to check the notes in tab 7. He thanked me. 2 days later, Lonnie from customer support messaged to ask where the updated holiday return policies were stored. Then came one from a vendor who said the January purchase orders were missing. It was clear the system hadn't broken. The people using it had never learned how to maintain it. I wasn't angry. I had built it to outlive me. But like any structure, it still needed upkeep. I gave them what I could without stepping back in. I sent links, I forwarded files, I stayed out of the way. Framework, meanwhile, was growing. I signed 3 new clients in the span of a week, each one referred by someone I had helped quietly, thoroughly, without fanfare. My services weren't flashy, and I didn't promise miracles. I listened, mapped their chaos, and gave them structure, for most of them. It was the first time someone had explained where their money went or why their team was spinning its wheels. I didn't show them how to look impressive. I showed them how to survive. Michael and I had lunch once a week by then, not planned or official, just a rhythm that grew naturally. He had been through his own family storms and come out standing. We talked about building things that no one applauded until they collapsed. We talked about how dignity, once fractured, takes longer to rebuild than revenue. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just shared a meal in silence that felt like understanding. The Ray House holiday campaign flopped. I wasn't surprised. I had warned Elliot a year ago that their audience didn't engage with polished influencer reels or abstract visuals. They wanted real wood, practical details, and shipping transparency. But Sasha had insisted, and my parents had followed. The campaign ran on borrowed aesthetics and forced energy. It burned through budget without return. Their web orders dropped 17% that quarter. I only knew because the freight partner forwarded me a report that still had my name as the contact. I gently replied, redirected them to Marcus, and closed the file. On New Year's Eve, I walked past the showroom just before midnight. The windows were dark. A closed sign leaned crookedly on the door, and inside, the counter I once stood behind was cluttered with paper and boxes. I didn't go in. I just stood across the street for a moment, then turned and kept walking. My phone buzzed with a message from a client in Vancouver who had just hit their first profitable quarter. Another from the floral studio, attaching photos of a newly organized back room I had helped design. The year had closed, not with applause or champagne, but with quiet evidence that the work mattered. In early January, Elliot called. I let it go to voicemail. His tone was clipped, formal. He said the inventory system was malfunctioning and suppliers were asking for immediate updates. He asked if I could have a look, or at least come by and troubleshoot. I played the message twice, listening not to the words but to what wasn't in them. There was no mention of past contributions, no apology, just a hint of urgency from someone who had lost track of what they once dismissed as routine. I sent back a simple reply. I included my consulting rate, my scheduling link, and a standard services contract. No emotion, no reminder of who I was, just what I offered now. 10 minutes later, he booked the first session. When I arrived at Ray House, it felt smaller than I remembered. The lights were dimmer, the shelves a little thinner. Marcus greeted me with visible relief. "It's been rough," he said quietly. "Nothing's syncing the way it used to." I nodded and opened my laptop. I ran diagnostics, flagged duplicate entries, and patched the logic that had been overwritten by a mismanaged update. In 2 hours, the system was functional again. Before I left, I handed Marcus a backup script and a printed checklist. "If they change this again," I said gently, "you'll know how to recover it." Elliot passed by once, didn't stop, just nodded, then walked away. I didn't need more than that. I drove home in silence, parked in front of my apartment, and sat for a long moment without moving. The work I had done had held. It had cracked, been misused, nearly collapsed. But it held, not because they protected it, because I had built it right. A week after the Ray House repair session, Veronica invited me to dinner. Not a family meal, not a holiday gathering, just a quiet reservation at her favorite bistro downtown. It was unusual. She had never made the effort before. I said yes out of curiosity more than sentiment. We sat across from each other at a corner table. White napkins, flickering candles, the kind of place she loved because it felt curated. She asked about my new clients, about framework, even mentioned she had browsed my website. "It's very clean," she said. "Efficient. It feels like you." I thanked her, unsure of what this was. There was a pause after the entrees arrived. She reached for her water glass, then looked at me carefully. "You know," she said slowly, "when you were little, you used to take your toys apart and put them back together just to see if they'd still work." I nodded. "Still do, just with real businesses now." She smiled, and for a moment, I thought she might say something real, but she didn't. She pivoted to Sasha's upcoming design lecture in Portland, then to how proud she was that both her children were making their way. I didn't correct her. I didn't remind her that only one of us had rebuilt something from scratch with no headlines and no handouts. I had stopped needing to win that comparison. I let her talk. I paid the bill. And when we stood outside on the sidewalk, she hugged me quickly and said, "We miss you at Sunday dinners." I said I was doing well, and I was. That was enough. Back at Framework, things had accelerated. One client turned into 4. 4 became 10. I hired a part-time assistant to help manage scheduling. I built out a new intake system that saved me 2 hours a week and gave clients a sense of process from the first touch point. Michael offered to introduce me to someone in publishing who helped niche consultants build digital products. "You could package some of this." He said, "Your systems work. People need them." I didn't say yes right away, but I filed it in the growing drawer in my mind labeled future. Then came the call I didn't expect. It was from a reporter writing a piece on women in silent operational roles across family-run businesses. She had been referred to me by 2 separate clients. She wanted to talk about legacy, systems, and what it meant to rebuild something without being the face of it. I gave her the interview. I told her what it was like to be the one who quietly saves the ship while others get credit for steering. I didn't name Ray House. I didn't need to. The article ran 2 weeks later. It was titled, "The Quiet Backbone, Women Who Build What Others Take Credit For." My section was short, but direct. It mentioned my past experience, my consulting focus, and a quote she pulled that I didn't even remember saying. If you want to know who holds the weight, look at who never leaves during a storm. I received more inquiries that week than any since launching. One came from a client in San Diego, another from a founder in Minneapolis. None of it felt accidental. The work was finally being seen not because I chased the spotlight, but because I had stopped hiding. A few days later, I received a message from Sasha. It was short. Saw the article. Glad you're getting your moment. Congrats. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Thanks. It's not a moment. It's a model. He didn't respond. Framework had officially outgrown the one-room office. I toured a larger space with 2 meeting rooms, a shared kitchen, and natural light that flooded in from both sides. It wasn't flashy, but it felt like enough. I signed the lease. I didn't tell anyone, not because I wanted to keep it secret, but because it no longer needed to be shared to feel real. On the drive home, I passed Ray House again. The sign in the window had changed. It now read, Reimagined by Sasha Ray. The font was modern, the tagline below it vague and aspirational. I stopped at a red light across from it and realized for the first time that I didn't feel erased anymore. I felt free. I had become the kind of person who didn't need credit to feel worthy, who didn't need the final word to know I'd shaped the beginning, the middle, and the system that kept it running. The legacy wasn't the logo. It was the way people worked now, the way their tools spoke to each other, the way a business survived a collapse, not because of vision, but because someone refused to let it die in chaos. The new office opened quietly on a Monday morning in early spring. There was no ribbon cutting, no press, no family visit, just a fresh pot of coffee, a to-do list written the night before, and my own keys turning in a lock that no one else held. The space smelled like paint and paper and possibility. My assistant had already arrived and was organizing the client folders on the central table. I walked to the window, looked out at the street below, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not victory, not arrival, just calm. It was the first time in years I didn't feel behind. The first meeting of the day was with a small retailer who had inherited her father's fishing supplies store. She looked tired, frustrated, and unsure if saving it was even worth the trouble. As she spoke, I heard pieces of myself in every sentence. She didn't want to quit. She just wanted it to feel like her effort meant something. I mapped her back-end systems, built her a rollout plan for seasonal inventory, and scheduled staff retraining. Before she left, she said, "You make it sound simple." I smiled. It's not, but it's fixable. Later that week, Framework was featured in a niche business newsletter that focused on operational transformation for small legacy brands. The headline read, "Fixers are the new founders." I didn't expect the feature, didn't pitch it. The journalist had interviewed one of my clients and traced the results back to me. The quote they used was one I had once scribbled on the back of a napkin during a long night. Systems don't need attention. People do. Get the systems right, and the humans can breathe again. The exposure brought more inquiries. A former COO in North Carolina wanted to license my staff manuals. A struggling bike shop in Austin asked if I could coach their operations team remotely. A bookstore in Denver asked for a site audit. I accepted what I could, referred what I couldn't, and built out a small, trusted network of consultants with the same quiet approach. No one wanted empire. We wanted endurance. Meanwhile, Ray House continued to unravel quietly, not all at once, but in small, steady fractures. Sasha's Portland showroom faced a lease dispute. after an investor pulled out. Their newest online initiative launched late and crashed twice. My mother emailed me once asking if I had time to look into the customer review filter, as if I still had access to their systems. I replied with a resource sheet, thanked her for thinking of me, and moved on. I didn't feel smug. I felt distant, like I was watching something I had once lived through a window that no longer opened from my side. I ran into Marcus by chance at a downtown cafe. He looked older than I remembered, but solid. He updated me quickly: supply issues, cash flow stress, staff turnover. I asked if he was okay. He nodded and said, "I'm learning the hard way why you built it the way you did." He paused, then added, "They didn't get it until it started slipping. I didn't say I told you so. I just said I understood." He asked if I'd ever consider consulting for them again. I told him I was booked out for months. That wasn't a lie. One Friday afternoon, I received a package at the office, no return label. Inside was a framed photo of the original Ray House storefront, the one built by my grandfather, with a note in my mother's handwriting that simply said, "Thought you might want this. Your name deserves to be near it." I sat with the frame on my desk for a long time, not because it moved me, but because it finally didn't need to. I hung it, not behind me where people could see it, but on the side wall above a shelf of reference books and project binders. Somewhere that made sense, somewhere mine. I didn't need to rewrite the past anymore. I had redesigned the present. Later that day, Michael stopped by to walk me to dinner. He glanced at the frame, smiled, and said, "Full circle." I shook my head. Not really. That would mean ending where I began. This feels more like a new line that doesn't trace back. He nodded slowly. Then maybe it's better than full circle, and I agreed. The first time I was invited to a public panel, I almost said no. It wasn't fear. It was the quiet resistance you develop after being excluded for too long. The event was titled Founders Who Rebuilt, and they asked me to speak last. The room was nothing like those networking nights I used to get sidelined at. This one was filled with calm voices, slow note-takers, people who cared more about questions than applause. I wore black. No logos, no loud jewelry, just clarity. When it was my turn, I told the truth, not about who hurt me, but about what I had to rewire in myself after they did. I spoke about trust, not the kind others break, but the kind you rebuild alone when no one's watching. I spoke about systems, how most failures aren't loud or explosive, just small frictions ignored until people give up. And I spoke about names, the ones we build, and the ones people try to erase when they think no one's keeping record. A woman in the audience asked how long it took before I felt stable again. I didn't give her a number. I said, "It's not about feeling safe. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to be seen to believe in her own worth." Afterward, a young man approached me near the coffee table. He worked at a startup in the same sector as the one that erased me. He said, "They still talk about you, you know, quietly, but they do." I nodded. I didn't need that confirmation, but hearing it didn't sting anymore. It sounded like something distant, like rain on someone else's window. That same week, I received a forwarded email from a mutual acquaintance. It was a note from my former company's COO, asking if I'd be open to a friendly consulting conversation. I stared at it for a few seconds, then archived it without responding. Not out of pride, out of peace. I had already built what they thought they stole from me, and I didn't need to walk backward to prove it. A few months later, A student from a local university emailed asking to intern with me. She wrote, "Your story made me feel like maybe it's okay not to be loud to be strong." I offered her a part-time position, and over time, she became one of the sharpest voices in our weekly meetings. She didn't try to mimic confidence. She carried questions like tools. I realized I had stopped trying to be understood by people who never valued clarity in the first place. One day, while organizing archive project folders, I found the last pitch deck I ever worked on before they pushed me out. My name wasn't on it, but I could tell it was mine from the pacing, the visual rhythm, the user flow logic no one else on that team ever understood. I saved it quietly in a new folder titled Origins. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me that just because something was buried doesn't mean it didn't exist. My partner and I now live in a home that feels like sunlight and silence. The office is 2 blocks away, tucked in between a plant store and a bike shop. Some weeks are chaotic, some are still, but none are desperate. We serve real clients who don't want to dominate, they want to endure. And that matters more than any headline. I've stopped checking in on them. I no longer wonder who's still there, or whether the company survived the downturn. That version of me, the one who kept hoping for validation, no longer runs the show. She's resting somewhere quiet, no longer fighting to be visible in rooms that thrive on dimming others. Now, when people ask for my story, I give them what they actually need, not a list of betrayals, but a set of tools. I tell them how to spot when the ground is shifting beneath you, how to walk away without needing to slam the door, and how to build something where your name is not decoration, but foundation. Because sometimes the best ending isn't revenge or recognition. It's not even justice. Sometimes it's just freedom.